Coming up next, Book TV presents Afterwards, an hour-long program where we invite guest hosts to interview authors. This week, the presidents of two well-known Washington think tanks discuss their latest books with each other. American Enterprise Institute President Arthur Brooks argues the moral superiority of the free enterprise system in his book, The Battle, how the fight between free enterprise and big government will shape America's future. While Brookings Institution President Strobe Talbott proposes a blueprint for U.S. action to tackle the effects of climate change in his new release, Fast Forward, Ethics and Politics in the Age of Global Warming.
Arthur, congratulations on a very, very insightful and incisive and provocative, and for me, very informational book.
Thank you, Strobe. I'm looking forward to spending the hour with you talking about your book, too.
Terrific. One thing that strikes me, and of course I'm going to give you a chance to capture the essence of it better than I would be able to do, is that what you describe as a battle between, and even a war, a culture war, between those who are more on the side of free enterprise and those who are more on the side of big government, is also a choice that many of us have to make in our lives as citizens and as voters, and that our leaders have to make in the way they try to govern us. But it's also a matter of balance, and you make that very, very clear. It's not an either-or, and you might even say a word or two about the 70-30 divide that you see in this country. And I hope we can, in the course of the conversation, talk a little bit about how that choice and that balance face us now as we try to cope with the financial crisis. Because there's a lot of evidence on both sides. That is, that there was too much free enterprise and that free enterprise needs to be reined in through regulation. And on the other side, that there's too much big government, and that has created to the problem and also contributed to the deficit. So did you play with some alternative titles for this? The Battle sounds like two camps and a clear demarcation between them.
Well, there is, in fact, a choice that we have to make in America between what we favor. Do we want our ideology or our outlook, the way that we express our economic system and our culture, to fall on the side generally of free enterprise, or are we more comfortable having it falling on the side of the bigger government? In fact, our policies in the United States and in Western Europe and all over the world will always be somewhere in between. We will never have a pure capitalist system or a pure socialist system. Those systems only exist in the laboratory. Mm-hmm. They only exist in the minds of a political scientist. Now, and that means that we're always going to be making some compromises. We always will be somewhere in between, but we have to decide, and the battle as I see it is in the way that we understand what we wish policies were doing more of. So when I say the battle, the ideological choice that we're making today, it's in citizens saying, do we see ourselves as fundamentally, I mean, notwithstanding the way policies are actually executed, do we see ourselves fundamentally as a free enterprise society, mm-hmm. or do we see ourselves more as a European-style social democracy? Now, both choices are legitimate in the minds of reasonable people, but we do have to choose, because if we don't, that in and of itself is a choice. One of the things that I argue in this book is that the way that, in the vernacular of Friedrich von Hayek, the way that you get down the road to serfdom is by accident, one policy at a time, where we can say we're a free enterprise nation, but we make one compromise and one bailout and one government intervention after the other, because they seem individually like great choices. And ultimately, when we think we're choosing free enterprise because we like it emotionally, ultimately we're choosing the other path because that was the more convenient thing to do at the individual policy level. That's why an actual choice emotionally in public policy and explicitly is something we need to decide on.
Well, we will, of course, concentrate on the implications of your thesis for our own country, but I am struck, both by reading the book and what I know about your own background, by your interest in Europe. And maybe we could just spend a minute on that. We've just had, of course, a major election and a rather complicated outcome in the UK, where the equivalent of the Social Democrats were, of course, turned out of office, I mean the Labour Party, and you've had the Tories come back, and you've got a more conservative government in Germany now. But you still see, I think, social democracy as very much a European phenomenon. Is that right?
I do. I see social democracy as something that people adhere to emotionally, people that recognize their own system as social democracy as being particularly European. Now, we in point of fact have social democracy in the United States too. The question is which road we like better, when a policy is going to break in a particular direction, which way will it break? In the United States, we have a system that's fundamentally more entrepreneurial. It was based on a more entrepreneurial notion from the founders, and there's evidence that immigrants to the United States are particularly entrepreneurial people. This is the reason that free enterprise, I argue, is not just an economic alternative, it's actually a social or a cultural phenomenon, and that's at the basis of this emotional relationship that Americans have with the idea of expanding liberty and individual opportunity and the free enterprise system.
Do you see European social democracy as facing a new crisis as a result of the Eurozone crisis right now?
Oh, I do. I mean, I think that the Eurozone, Europe in general, is bumping up against the limits of what social democracy can do, simply because social democracy has the safety net involved in social democracy is so unbelievably expensive that when you run into demographic difficulties like Europe is, they stopped having enough children 25 years ago, that you sooner or later are going to have too many takers and not enough makers, to put it in relatively blunt terms. You have too many people that are retired, usually retired very early in the European case, and not enough people working to support those folks. And that's some of the realities that the Europeans are running up against right now. And in point of fact, that's part of what's leading to the terrible crises that they're facing.
And do you think that'll have a cathartic and ultimately positive effect in driving them away from what you see as the excesses of social democracy?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the Europeans will do, because I think that the Europeans actually like the whole concept of social democracy. I think it will provide an instructive lesson to us, however. We don't like social democracy very much, even though we choose that path occasionally. And looking what's happened at Europe, we can find a cautionary tale. We can actually continue to be a little bit more entrepreneurial here. And remember, this is where it ends. I mean, there's a perfect contrast that we can see between the United States and Europe today, which is in the protests in America versus the protests in Greece. In the United States, love them or hate them, the Tea Partiers are ethical populists that are protesting bigger government, more spending, the welfare state. And in Greece, they're protesting because they want more big government, more of the welfare state. In other words, it's kind of a me first protest in Greece, and it's don't give me more stuff kind of protest in the United States. Now, there's a lot to be critical of in both cases, but it couldn't be a bigger contrast in the social difference and the outlook difference between the Europeans and the Americans is what they're actually throwing their Molotov cocktails over.
Well, you brought us home, which is good. And what I'd like to do is explore a little bit your concept of the 70-30 divide. And the essence of it, of course, is that 70% of us, and this raises the famous Tonto question to the Lone Ranger, what's this we stuff, paleface? I'm bawdlerizing it a little bit, as you know. I had an interesting reaction on that. It was, first of all, it's a very good template. It helps make your thesis very clear and very stark. But what I found myself doing is I would identify quite often with the 30%. You'll explain to our viewers in a second what that means, while at the same time I don't think of myself as being in any sense against free enterprise. Right. So I see myself as an example of something you acknowledge in the book, and that is that a lot of us are torn internally a little bit as to this choice that you say we have to make.
Sure. What the data say is that virtually no matter how you ask questions about free enterprise, you're going to find that 70% are strongly in favor of it and 30% are skeptical of the benefits of the free enterprise system. So if we ask, for example, as the Pew Research Center asked in March of 2009, do you believe that the free market system is the best system for America's economy despite severe ups and downs? The basic wording of the question. That 70% said yes, 20% said no, and 10% were undecided. If you ask people if they're favorable to the free enterprise system, as the Gallup polling organization has periodically done, you will find right now, basically, that 86% of Americans will say yes. And so it's always 70% or above are very favorable to free enterprise. If you ask if business is at the center of American strength, if you ask if we should be taxing people, other people even more or less, you'll find it's about 70-30 is how the split always goes. Now, what that suggests is, as a 70-30 nation, that if you think that we're not being governed according to the principles of free enterprise, you have to ask yourself, so If we're a 70% nation, how come the 30% is in charge? And that's an important question. It's a question, no doubt, that's on your mind, or anybody who would hear that we're a 70-30 nation would ask, and it is exactly the question that I had when I started running across these public opinion data.